President Obama recently visited Hiroshima. Rather unique thing to happen. First time a sitting president in 70 years has gone to Hiroshima. What do you think about that?
I think it was a courageous decision by the president to do it. I think he could have been more explicit, but maybe I'm just underestimating what he actually said. But I think he could have been a little more explicit in simply saying that this is something of which Americans have to feel in some respects deeply pained that fate imposed the necessity of doing something so brutal in order to end the war. Kind of implicitly both acknowledging the necessity of the event and yet its ultimate abhorrence and cruelty. Now, if you want to be, really more minuscule about it, you can also point out the fact that there was a previous attack by us, and the Japanese were not responding, and we were left with the dilemma of whether to do much more, and we weren't too sure how much more we can do, but that gets into the details. Some or other I would have liked to have seen that the president shares, as I'm sure he does in his heart, the bitter pain of what transpired and the tragic necessity, perhaps, of having to do it and wishing that it hadn't been so.
I think the president in his remarks mentioned that over 60 million people died in World War II, and so there was a broad ruthlessness that emerged in such a cruel war. I think that's probably part of the backdrop of his thinking.
That's right, and at that time not everyone was yet quite aware of the extent to which the Japanese might or might not continue the military operations, and hearts had hardened. If war goes on for several years and entails such enormous sacrifices, it does have an impact. Nonetheless, I sort of had a feeling that more could have been accomplished by addressing the human side of what transpired more fully and how it does, in effect, pain us to be part of that history. But that's a question of speechwriters, too. And the president has some very good ones who periodically let the world know how good they are.
You didn't explicitly say it, but I think you were referring to the firebombing of Tokyo. And more people died through that than did in the nuclear attacks. And it was a ruthless and bitter thing, but it was the nature of the war that we were fighting.
That's right.
Do you think we have transitioned to a larger consciousness about war? Is this so horrific that we now know that and we've made it implausible for that kind of war in the future?
I don't know. I wonder whether there is such a thing as a higher moral content or moral standard. If situations arise in which your closest to you and dearest to you are being killed, usually you don't have time to analyze in depth what is the proper distribution of justice. Retaliation, termination of what is happening are the sort of immediate, powerful instincts. So in that sense, I'm explaining and seemingly defending what happened. And if I was sitting in the chair in which I was sitting, let's say 50, 60 years later, I probably would have urged the president, drop it. It'll end the war sooner. And then, of course, sets in the regret and the realization how terribly brutal that particular device is and how cruel the death that it inflicts is.